It was my 68th birthday when a strange package arrived. No card, no name, just a couple of cold words, "Happy birthday." But I recognized that scrawl instantly. That's a thing you don't forget, not when you raised a boy for 2 decades. I hadn't seen it in 3 years, not since my son Sebastian walked out of my life. I tore open the box, and inside was this fancy bottle of whiskey. It was a limited edition, the kind of thing you'd put on a shelf and just look at. But Sebastian didn't know I'd been on the wagon for 3 years, ever since the doctor told me my heart was a time bomb. So instead of popping the cork, I handed it off to Arthur Reed, his father-in-law. It was just a bottle of whiskey, or so I thought, until I found out that little gift damn near killed both of us. And that was just the beginning. I set the bottle on the kitchen table. The morning sun was slicing through the blinds, turning the room into stripes of light and shadow. The liquor caught the light like it was a jar of liquid fire. The label was a deep green with gold letters, looking like it cost more than a brand new car. I rubbed my thumb over the wax seal on the cork, feeling how smooth it was. Whiskey used to be my thing. Not a slobbering drunk kind of thing, but a slow, easy way to unwind. Just a single glass after a long day of mending fences or cleaning out the gutters. Back when Betty was still around, she'd pour us a glass after supper. On Sundays, we'd sit on the porch swing and just let the crickets sing to us. That was a long time before the heart attack took the choice away. I haven't had a single drop since. And Sebastian knew that. He was right there at the hospital when the doc gave me the whole list of stuff I couldn't eat or drink if I wanted to make it to 70. He didn't say much then, just stared down at his phone, his thumbs flying. I told myself he was trying to keep his mind off things. Now I'm not so sure. We didn't have a big fight, not the kind where somebody screams and slams a door. Nope, we just kind of stopped. First, he missed a Sunday dinner. Then, he didn't show up for Thanksgiving. By the second Christmas without him, I figured we weren't talking at all. Silence has a way of becoming a bad habit. So, seeing his handwriting again, it twisted something inside me. It wasn't happiness, not even relief. Just a heavy feeling I couldn't put a name to. The plain white envelope taped to the side of the box had a single card inside with, "Happy Birthday," written in blue ink. No Dad, no signature. Just those 2 words, like they were scared to say anything else. I didn't open the bottle. Didn't even consider it. I slid it to the far side of the table and went back to my coffee, which was now cold. The clock over the stove kept ticking, steady and slow, making the house feel even more empty. Arthur Reed's face popped into my head. He's the kind of guy who never shows up to your place empty-handed, and his truck always has a full toolbox in the back. A couple of years ago, after a big storm ripped half the shingles off my roof, he was on a ladder with a hammer in his hand by 8 a.m., even before I'd had my first cup of coffee. He's the type who doesn't wait to be asked for a hand. If anyone deserved something nice, it was him. And since I couldn't drink the whiskey myself, the thought of it just sitting on my shelf collecting dust felt wrong. Arthur would open it, share it with his friends, and let it have a story to tell. That sounded a whole lot better than watching it turn to a decoration behind glass. By mid-afternoon, I had the bottle all buckled into the passenger seat of my old pickup. I don't know why I did that, just a weird habit, I guess, but the thought of it rolling around on the floor of the truck made me feel a little queasy. The sun was starting to go down, painting everything in that golden light you only see in late October. The fields along County Road 2 were turning brown, the soybean stalks all cut down to nothing. The air smelled a little bit like someone was burning a brush pile. Arthur's place sits on a hill at the edge of town, a little white house with a porch that wraps all the way around, looking like something off a postcard. I pulled up, the gravel crunching under my tires, and turned the engine off. He opened the door before I could even knock. He was wearing a red flannel shirt and old jeans, and there was sawdust all over his boots. His eyes went right to the bottle in my hands. "Walter, what's this?" he asked, stepping out onto the porch. "From Sebastian," I said, holding it out. His eyebrows shot up. "Sebastian sent you this?" "Yeah. Figured you'd get more enjoyment out of it than me." He took it carefully, turning it to read the label. "This is something, Walter. This is the kind of bottle you save for a special night," I told him, "so go on and make tonight special." He grinned. "I think I will." "Thanks, Walter." It felt good to hand it off, to see it land somewhere it would be appreciated. I got back in my truck, the late light shining across the dashboard. Driving home, I kept thinking about the bottle, not because I was thirsty, but because I was curious. Sebastian never spent that kind of money without a reason. Heck, half the time when he was younger, he'd borrow cash from me for gas and forget to pay it back. So why now? Why, of all things, would he send a gift he knew I couldn't use? The thought kept nagging at me. I tried to shut it down. Not everything needs a reason, I told myself. But I didn't believe it. That night, I made a pot roast, and the house filled with the smell of onions and carrots. It's the kind of meal that's better when you share it, but I ate it alone. The wall clock ticked its way toward 9. I was washing the last plate when the phone rang, the landline. Almost nobody uses that thing anymore. "Hello, Dad." Sebastian's voice, smooth and casual, like no time had passed at all. I leaned against the counter. "Sebastian. Happy birthday," he said, a little too late to sound real. "Did you get my gift?" "I did." "So, what did you think?" "It's a nice bottle. Did you try it yet?" His voice tightened just a bit at the edges. "No. I gave it to Arthur. Figured he'd get more use out of it." Silence. Not a bad connection, not static. Just a long, heavy pause. "You gave it to Arthur?" His voice had gone cold. "That's right." There was a sound like a long breath out, slow and measured. "Huh." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a second before putting it back. The clock kept ticking. My stomach felt all twisted up, and not because of the roast. It was the way he'd asked about the whiskey, like it mattered in a way it shouldn't. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. When I finally did drift off, it was a light, restless sleep, the kind that leaves you more tired than you were before. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down with the newspaper. But the phone rang again, around midday this time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't know, but it was local. "Mr. Dalton," a voice said when I answered. "Yes. This is Betty Reed, Arthur's wife." Her voice was tight. "I thought you should know Arthur's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. They think it might be some kind of poisoning." The coffee in my hand turned ice cold. "Poisoning?" "He was fine last night," she said. "We had one drink with dinner, and this morning he could barely stand up. The doctors are running tests." I couldn't speak. My eyes went to the counter, to the empty spot where the whiskey had been less than 24 hours ago. "Did he eat anything strange?" she asked. My mouth was dry. "No, but I gave him a bottle yesterday." "Whiskey from Sebastian?" There was a pause. In the background, I could hear hospital sounds, the beeping of monitors, the squeak of a cart in the hall. "I'll tell the doctors," she finally said. "If you think of anything else, anything at all, call me." I said I would and hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, the house silent around me. The October light was pale and flat. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, it was to walk over to the trash can. Something white caught my eye near the bottom, a small plastic tube, like a vitamin bottle. No label, just a little bit of white powder stuck to the inside. I didn't remember throwing it away. I picked it up. The cap was screwed on tight. I went to the fridge. On the middle shelf was a mason jar with about half a cup of whiskey in it, left over from when I'd poured Arthur a little taste before giving him the bottle. I hadn't even remembered saving it until that moment. My hands were shaking as I took it out and set it on the counter next to the plastic tube. Paul and I had served together 30 years ago, and now he ran a small vet lab on the edge of town. He owed me a favor from a few winters back when I'd pulled his truck out of a ditch. I called him. "Paul," I said quietly, "I need you to test something for me." "What is it?" "Whiskey. And maybe something else." He didn't ask any more questions, just told me to meet him after he closed up shop. That evening, I drove out to his lab, the mason jar wrapped in a paper bag on the seat next to me. Paul met me in the parking lot, his lab coat over a sweatshirt. The faint smell of disinfectant hung in the air. "This is the kind of thing I'm gonna regret, isn't it?" he asked. "Just tell me what's in it," I said. He nodded, took the bag, and went inside. I sat in the truck with the engine running, watching the light disappear from the sky. The radio was off. My mind kept going back over the last 24 hours, replaying every step. The handwriting. The bottle. Sebastian's voice when I told him I'd given it to Arthur. That long, heavy pause. My stomach knotted up. Paul called the next afternoon. "Walter, you're not going to like this. There's something in the whiskey. White snakeroot. In the right dose, it'll stop a man's heart." I closed my eyes. The phone felt heavy in my hand. "You said Arthur drank this?" "Yes." "And you didn't?" "No." He let out a slow breath. "Then you just might have dodged a bullet." And that's where the first part of this story ends. Not with answers, but with a question that would take me to places I never thought I'd have to go. Because the minute I hung up, I knew Sebastian had sent me more than a gift. He'd sent me a message. I used to think there was no worse sound than the phone ringing in the middle of the night. Turns out, there is. It's the phone ringing when you already know, deep down, that the news is going to be bad. When Paul hung up after telling me the whiskey had white snakeroot in it, the world around me went dead quiet, like the house was holding its breath. I didn't just sit there. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, pulled my truck keys off the hook by the door, and headed straight for St. Gabriel's Hospital. The drive into town was all stop lights and empty crossroads, the kind of late morning where the sun is bright but doesn't give off any heat. I parked in the far corner of the lot out of habit and walked fast, one hand in my pocket, the other pressed to my ribs like I could hold myself together. All hospitals smell the same. A mix of cleaning supplies and old coffee. And the lights are always too bright. A volunteer pointed me to Arthur's room. He didn't look like the man who'd climbed my roof without being asked. He looked thin, all washed out, his skin paler than the pillow under his head. The machines by his bed hummed and blinked along with a slow, stubborn heartbeat. Betty was sitting in a plastic chair pulled as close as she could get. She had that look I've seen 100 times, the one people wear when they're waiting for something that just won't hurry up and get here. "Walter," she said, standing up. "Thanks for coming. How is he?" They're trying to stabilize his heart rhythm." Her hands were clasped at her chest, not like she was praying, but like she was trying to hold her breath in so it wouldn't leak out. "They said they found signs of a plant toxin. They're doing more tests." I stepped closer to the bed. Arthur's mouth was slightly open, a line of breath in, a line of breath out. His hair, always combed back neatly, had fallen onto his forehead in a way that made him look both younger and more frail at the same time. I didn't belong here as family, not on paper. But blood isn't the only thing that measures how close you are to someone. Sometimes it's the person who shows up with a hammer and a smile before you even have time to worry that your roof might leak. "Did he eat anything unusual last night?" I asked. "Or drink anything he doesn't normally?" We both had one glass with dinner. She looked at me, the question already in her eyes. The bottle you brought? He said it was the best whiskey he'd ever tasted. He wanted to save the rest for a special occasion. My jaw tightened without me even thinking about it. I need you to tell the doctors exactly that, I said. Tell them it was a brand new, unopened bottle. And tell them I can get them a small sample from the same bottle. She reached out like she was going to take my hand, then changed her mind and gripped the bed rail instead. Walter, what is this? You think? I don't know what I think, I said, which was only half a lie. But I'm going to find out. The doctor came in, a man in his 50s with a face that had learned not to show anything. He explained in a quiet, practiced tone about heartbeats and enzymes and observation. He didn't say what he didn't know, and he didn't know much yet. When he left, Betty sat back down, and I promised to call her as soon as I had anything she could use. She just nodded, but the nod had no weight to it. It was something for her head to do because her hands were already committed to staying clenched. I walked out with my jaw still tight and my hands shoved into my jacket pockets. The automatic doors opened and let in air that felt all wrong for October, bright as a postcard and cold as a church. In the truck, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there with the key halfway in the ignition and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like a man who had nothing left to break that hadn't already been cracked once before. White snakeroot, I said out loud, testing the words like a carpenter checking a board for a curve. They sounded cold. They sounded on purpose. On the way home, the road unspooled like a tape you've listened to too many times. I turned onto my street and didn't notice a thing. Not the mailboxes, not the dog at the corner, not the man raking leaves with his kid. I parked, locked the truck without even thinking, and went straight for the fridge. The mason jar with the splash of whiskey was still there on the middle shelf, hidden behind the milk. I held it up to the light and watched the liquid swirl against the glass when I tipped it. You wouldn't know just by looking. You never do. The worst things always look like they're nothing to worry about. I put the jar down by the sink and walked over to the trash can. I had tossed that little white tube in there yesterday. I hadn't taken the trash out. I'm a man living alone, and my trash doesn't fill up as fast as it used to. I lifted the lid, looked down, and my body just froze. The bag had been taken out and put back in the wrong way, and the plastic tube was gone. I looked at the door. The deadbolt was set just like I'd left it last night. The windows were all latched. I don't keep a spare key under a rock or a mat. I don't keep a spare key anywhere a moron might think to look. And yet, someone had been in here. I could feel it, just like you know a room has been changed even if you can't say what got moved. I took a long breath in through my nose and let it out slowly. Not panic. Panic is loud and stupid. I needed to be quiet and smart. I picked up the phone and called Paul. It's gone, I said when he answered. The little tube I told you about? Someone took it out of my trash. I didn't move it. I know what my own hands do in my own house. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. Paul knows what it costs to ignore what your gut already knows. You need to get the cops involved, he said. I can prove what's in the whiskey, but that tube would have been a solid piece of evidence. I know, I said. I will. Walter? Yeah? Don't let whoever did this think you're asleep on the job. I'm not, I said, and ended the call. I made a cup of coffee I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. Writing things down helps me think. I drew a line down the middle of the page and wrote, what I know, on the left and, what I can prove, on the right. Under, what I know, I wrote, Sebastian sent the bottle. Sebastian asked if I'd tried it. Sebastian's voice changed when I said I gave it to Arthur. The whiskey Paul tested has white snakeroot. The tube is missing. Under, what I can prove, I wrote, Paul's test. The leftover sample is in the jar. The call from Sebastian last night, if my memory is right. Then I stared at the two columns and wanted to build a bridge between them. Bridges don't just appear because you want them to. You have to build them. I took the small digital voice recorder out of my desk drawer. It's an old thing, a little scratched up. It's cheap, but it's always done its job without me ever thanking it. I checked the battery, half full. I slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket, right where its weight would feel like a hand on my chest, reminding me to breathe. It was just past noon when I pulled into Sebastian's neighborhood. His house was one of a row of houses that all looked like the same idea with slight changes. Neutral siding, shiny brass numbers, and a porch light that came on all by itself when the sun went down. His truck was in the driveway, clean and a decade newer than mine. I walked up the path and knocked. He opened the door with a face that shifted twice before settling on something he thought looked like a friendly greeting. First, surprise, then calculation, and then warmth. "Dad," he said, like he'd been expecting me, but also like he had no clue what I wanted. "This is a surprise." "Is it?" I asked, and walked in without waiting. The place smelled like lemon and nothing else. He keeps it neat. Everything is at a perfect angle. Nothing is out of place, except for the kind of books you buy to make it look like you're smart. "I heard about Arthur," he said, closing the door. "Scary. Grace is with him now. The doctors think it might be a virus." "Is that what they think?" I kept my voice flat. If I pushed him, he'd dig his heels in. If I showed I was hurting, he'd use it. "That's what she said," he replied. "That's what they're saying." I walked into the kitchen. There on the counter were 3 bottles, 2 of bourbon, 1 of rye, lined up like soldiers. None of them was the brand I'd given him. None of them had been opened. I looked back at him. He was watching me look at his stuff, and he smiled like a man who believes the way his smile looks is how it feels to everyone else. "Did you try the bottle you sent me?" I asked. He laughed softly. "The whole point was for you to enjoy it, you know, for your birthday. You know I don't drink anymore." "People change," he said with a shrug that made me feel like I wasn't even worth his time. I took 1 step closer to the counter and ran a finger along the rim of an empty glass sitting by the sink, like a man who's just killing time while his host gets him some coffee. "Arthur liked it," I said. "He said his favorite part was the one from the middle shelf, the single malt." He blinked just once, slower than a reflex. "Yeah. Funny thing is," I said, and I could feel the recorder in my pocket, steady as a heartbeat, "I never told you where it was stored." For the smallest fraction of a second, he went still, the way an animal does when it hears a twig snap. Then his mouth twisted up on one side, and he shook his head with a little fake laugh. "You must have told me. You get all sentimental and chatty." "I didn't," I said, and just stared at him until he had to choose whether to look away or try to outlast me. He chose a third option. He grabbed a dish towel and started drying a glass that was already dry. "Dad," he said, looking at the glass instead of me. "You always overthink everything. You're always trying to fix something even when nobody asked you to. You sent me a $500 bottle I can't drink," I said. "I'm trying to fix that." He put the glass down and held his hands out like a guy with nothing to hide. "Then maybe just don't. Maybe give me the benefit of the doubt for once." His voice could have sounded reasonable if you hadn't been listening to it for 30 years. My son has a way of sounding honest when he's practiced his lines. The silence from last night sat between us like another person in the room, perched on the counter and swinging its legs. "I'm going to ask you a question," I said. "And I'm going to let the silence after it give me the answer." He gave me a look like we were playing chess and I just announced my next move out loud. "Okay. Did you mess with that whiskey?" Silence. It's a living thing when you use it right. The fridge hummed. The clock on the microwave clicked from 12:09 to 12:10. A car went by outside, slow enough that we both heard the tires on the pavement. He didn't look away. He also didn't say a word. "Goodbye, Sebastian," I said, because sometimes leaving is the only thing that matters. "Dad," he said as I turned to leave, in that tone where the word is both a hook and a warning. I stopped, but I didn't turn back. "You keep accusing me of things, you'll push me away," he said. "I'm not accusing," I told the door. "I'm collecting." Outside, the air was sharp and a little metallic. I got into the truck and pressed my thumb against the recorder's stop button. The red light blinked off. I set it on the seat next to me and stared at it like it was a witness I might have to put on the stand later. My hands were steady. My head was not. I didn't drive home. Not yet. I parked at the far end of a grocery store lot where no one would bother me and made a call I'd been putting off ever since Paul said, "White snakeroot." "Detective Richards," a voice said after 2 rings. "Detective, my name is Walter Dalton. I believe I have some information about a poisoning. I have a sample of the substance and an audio recording you might be interested in." He didn't ask me to explain myself right there on the phone. Guys who know their job don't demand the whole story in the first breath. "Can you come in this afternoon?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I can." He gave me a time and an office number in the back hallway of the station. When I hung up, I sat with my hands on the wheel and looked straight ahead. The grocery store's automatic doors kept opening for no one and closing for no one else. People came and went, carrying paper bags full of apples and milk and things that would make their houses smell like dinner. I went back to the house and stopped at the mailbox because sometimes you need to do something regular to keep the other stuff from swallowing you whole. Flyers, a bill, a grocery ad, and a postcard from a car dealership that thinks I can be bought with 0% interest. Inside, I put the mason jar into a Ziploc bag, sealed it like I knew what I was doing, and slid it into an old cigar box I kept for nails. The recorder went in there too. I put the box in a paper bag with handles. I put that bag inside another bag because once you've had one thing disappear from your trash, 2 layers start to feel less like being paranoid and more like plain old common sense. I called Betty. She answered on the second ring, her voice quiet. "I'm going to the police, Betty," I said. "I have a sample and something else." "Is Arthur resting?" she said. "They've got him on a monitor. He keeps waking up and asking what day it is." I tell him, and he nods like he's trying to decide if he believes me. "I'll call you after I meet with the detective," I said. "Tell him I'll stop by later if he wants to see an old face that isn't asking him to be strong." She laughed a single, breathless sound. "He likes being asked to be strong," she said. "But he likes you more." I locked up, checked the back door, checked the window latches again, and walked out to the truck. The paper bag sat on the passenger seat like a person. I buckled it in because habit is comfort when you're short on sense. On the way to the station, I turned the radio on without listening to it. People sang about things that sounded simple. It made me mad, and then it made me tired, and then it made me feel nothing at all. The station was cooler than the hospital somehow, and it smelled better. Richards met me in a small office with a window that looked out at a brick wall. He was a lot younger than me, but older than a rookie, with sharp eyes and a tie that had been straightened more than once today. He offered me water. I said yes because my mouth was dry and because people notice when you refuse everything they offer. He waited until I took a sip before he asked his first question. "Tell me about the whiskey." So I did. I gave him the dates, the word Sebastian used, and the pause that didn't feel like a surprise. I didn't give him my theories. I gave him the index cards of the facts and let him stack them however he wanted. Then I put the paper bag on his desk and took the box out, opened it, and set the mason jar and the recorder on his blotter-like tools at the start of a job. He didn't touch them yet. He asked questions that sounded small but weren't. Who else has keys to your house? When did you last check your trash? Did you mention the vial to anyone besides Paul? Then he lifted the recorder and weighed it in his hand, the way a man does when he's thinking about how heavy a word might be if you had to carry it. You understand, he said, this doesn't become a case just because you and I both have a feeling. It becomes a case when what you've handed me can hold up to other people looking at it. I do, I said. I want other people to look at it. He nodded. We'll send the liquid to the state lab. We'll make a copy of your audio. If there's cause, we'll move forward. If there isn't, we'll tell you exactly why we can't. You okay with that? I am, I said, and meant it. I'm not in the business of wanting the wrong man punished. I'm in the business of wanting the right truth told. When I stood up to leave, he said my name like he was trying it out to see how it felt. Mr. Dalton. Yes. Don't speak to your son again until I tell you to. If he reaches out, write down the time and what he says, and keep your answers shorter than his questions. I nodded, surprised by the feeling that someone else was finally willing to carry a corner of the weight I'd been holding. Outside, the afternoon had turned into a dull gray kind of bright, the kind that hurts your eyes more than it lights your way. I drove to the hospital. Betty was in the same chair, and the same machines were humming their quiet electronic songs. Arthur looked a little more like himself. His skin had a bit of color back, and his mouth was less tight around the breath that came and went. I put my hand on the rail, and his eyes cracked open. You look like hell, he whispered. You should see yourself, I said. And he smiled with just the left side of his mouth. The way men do when smiling takes too much of the rest of their face. I heard you're making friends with the police, he said. I'm trying to make sure they're on our side when they show up, I said. He closed his eyes again, nodded once, and drifted off. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the machine keep him honest about his heartbeat. Betty whispered things that don't belong to anyone but them. I stepped out into the hall and called Paul to thank him for moving faster than I had any right to ask. He told me that's what friends were for and to watch my back. I told him I would. At home, the house had the nerve to be exactly as I'd left it. The quiet sat in the rooms like a guest who refuses to go home. I made myself an omelette I didn't finish and washed the pan because some things you do just to prove to yourself you're still the same person who does them. I went to the hall closet, pulled down the fireproof box from the top shelf, and opened it on the kitchen table. It held the papers of a life, birth certificates, the deed to the house, and Betty's rose gold wedding ring that I haven't been ready to get rid of. I added a post-it note to the inside lid, whiskey sample with police. Do not discard. I don't know who the note was for. Maybe it was for me. I slept on the couch with the hall light on. I hadn't done that since the night after my heart attack, and my chest didn't like the way those two facts looked, standing right next to each other. I woke up before dawn because the body remembers old alarms. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I listened to the house breathe. When the sun finally decided to show itself, I called Betty and told her I'd be by around noon. She said the doctor thought Arthur would be moved out of the critical unit if his numbers kept behaving. Behaving is a word for toddlers and heartbeats. I like the sound of it. By 10 a.m., the phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail because I'd learned something important yesterday. You don't owe anyone an answer before you're ready to give it. The message came in after the second ring. I waited, then pressed play. Dad, it's me. Sebastian's voice was pulled tight like a wire. We need to talk. Sooner is better than later. He paused. Call me back. I didn't. I wrote down the time and his exact words and put the note in the fireproof box because sometimes you need to make your own evidence. I looked out the window at my yard, which refuses to stay green no matter how much a man waters it. The porch swing creaked once. There was no wind I could see. The day was too quiet again. If you want me to say I wasn't scared, I won't. Fear isn't a thing I hide from anymore. It belongs to the truth the way nails belong to wood. They hold it all together. I stood there in the kitchen with my hand on the back of a chair and knew this much without writing it down. Whatever this was, it had passed the point where a father and a son could fix it at a table by talking slower and softer than the last time. It had passed the point where a bottle was just a gift and a hospital was just a place that happens to other people. It was going to get worse before it got better. And I was going to keep walking toward it. One room, one phone call, one steady breath at a time. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just sit still. It paces. It taps the edge of your coffee mug. It watches the phone on the counter and counts to 60 with you, then starts all over again. Detective Richards told me not to talk to my son, so I didn't call Sebastian back. I wrote down the time of his voicemail like it was a license plate I needed to remember. In the morning, I did exactly what the detective asked, and still the house felt watched. I left the phone on the hallway table and walked the rooms with my hands behind my back, not because I expected to find anything, but because men like me don't sit when we can stand. We don't rest when there's a job to be done. The October light came in thinner today. A white sheet hung over the sun. I checked the back door, the window latches, and the garage side entrance with the stubborn lock you have to lift while you turn. All fine, all normal. Normal is not the same as safe. I made a second pot of coffee. I didn't drink it and opened the fireproof box on the kitchen table. Inside were the deed, a stack of insurance forms, Betty's ring, and the note where I'd copied the exact words from Sebastian's message. I added another note, Detective Richards, 2:30 p.m. underlined twice. All morning, I'd been holding off on calling the station back, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to show up with a full day of calmness inside me. Before I left, I took one more slow walk around the house. In the front hall, I stopped. The deadbolt lined up with the strike plate, but it was off by just a hair. A new scuff at the lip of the metal, small and light, the way a key that isn't cut perfectly will rub after a few uses. Nothing was broken, nothing was forced, just a mark you only notice if you know the door like you know the bones in your own hand. A thought parked itself in my chest and did not move. Someone had let themselves in. I went to the junk drawer and found a short piece of thread and a strip of clear tape. I laid the thread across the bottom of the door frame and taped it down so it would stay put. It was a trick I'd learned from a corporal who was tired of finding his locker messed with. You don't trap a thief, you tell a story about whether he's been there. When I got into the truck, the house looked empty and harmless, which is exactly how a house is supposed to look. I backed out anyway, like I was leaving a sleeping animal behind. St. Gabriel's is 3 turns and a long straightaway from the station, so I carried the hospital in my bones while I walked the hall to Detective Richards's office. He has one of those rooms they give to the middle-level guys, a small window, a big desk, and stacks of files that look like they grow in the dark. He stood up to shake my hand and pointed me to a chair. He didn't look like a man who'd stayed up too late or a man who'd slept too well. He looked like a man who knew what to do with a solid fact. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Dalton," he said. "And for the samples yesterday. We've sent them to the state lab. Your friend Paul's preliminary results match what we saw. We're taking this seriously." "I assume seriously has levels," I said. He almost smiled. "It does. Right now, it means we're gathering proof. The hospital's doctors, your audio, the chain of custody on your sample." He slid a legal pad toward me. "I want your timeline in your own words. When you got the package, when you gave it to Mr. Reed, when your son called, when you found the vial was missing." I told him straight, watching his pen move. He didn't interrupt except to double-check a time or a day. When I finished, he tapped the pad with the side of the pen and leaned back. "You said the trash bag had been messed with, turned around the wrong way. You didn't move it. Any sign of forced entry?" "No. Anyone else with keys? No spare keys hidden. No one I've given one to recently. My late wife had hers. My son had one when he was younger. When's the last time you saw him with it? The answer wanted to be a lifetime ago, but the truth walked in wearing a hospital gown 5 years back, after my heart attack when Sebastian had come by the house to grab some things for me before I was discharged. He'd brought a bag with slippers, sweatpants, and my phone charger. At the time, I'd told him, "Thank you for at least remembering the charger." I didn't ask him for my keys back, I said slowly. I assumed I'd left them on the kitchen counter. After my heart attack, he had them then. I don't remember him handing them back. Richards nodded, neither surprised nor pleased. If someone entered without force, that helps explain the missing vial. Did anyone else know about the vial? Just Paul. I'll ask him to document his conversation with you, just to show we're not making things up after the fact. He flipped the pad closed. Mr. Dalton, I'm going to say this plainly. Don't meet your son. If he invites you anywhere, let me know. If he shows up, call us. I don't think he's interested in a conversation. I thought of Sebastian's voice on my voicemail, wound tight like a cable under a car hood you shouldn't touch while the engine is hot. I'll do exactly what you say. He slid a card across the desk. My cell. If you feel like something's wrong, call. I'd rather be wrong twice than right too late. I appreciate that, I said, standing. He did too. On the way out, the building smelled like copier toner and floor wax. I took the stairs down 2 flights and stopped on the landing to breathe. I wasn't out of breath. I was checking that the ground under me was still the same ground I'd walked on when I came in. Betty's call came as I was pulling into the hospital's garage. I answered on the second ring. Walter, he's better, she said, tears in her words. They're moving him out of critical to a step-down unit. He keeps apologizing every time he wakes up like he thinks he ruined someone's party. It'll be a party when he's home, I said. Can I stop by? Please. Arthur looked a bit more alive, but solid, propped up now, his eyes clearer. He reached for my forearm when I came in, that old working man's handshake where you anchor each other past the wrist. You look worse today, he said, which made Betty laugh through the tissue she held at her chin. I brought my worst for a visit, I said, pulling the chair up. I'll bring my better tomorrow. Betty excused herself to speak with a nurse. When the curtain slid closed, Arthur lowered his voice. Walter, between us, he glanced at the door, then back. You think Sebastian did this? I think that bottle wasn't a gift. He watched my face like he was learning a new language from it. You going to be okay handling that? I'm going to be lawful, I said. I'm going to be steady. That's not what I asked. I let the question sit there long enough to tell him I'd heard it. I'm going to be okay handling it. He squeezed my forearm once, then let go. Guys like us don't hug unless we're at a funeral. The squeeze is the permission slip to feel without the paperwork. The curtain opened, and Betty returned with a younger woman at her side, maybe in her mid-30s, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, eyes tired but sharp. I recognized her from photos on the mantel at Sebastian's house. Grace. My daughter-in-law. We'd spoken twice since the wedding, politely, like neighbors who live a few blocks apart. Walter, she said. I'm glad you're here. I stood up. How are you holding up? She glanced at Arthur. Scared, angry, mostly scared. Her voice dropped. We need to talk. Betty stroked Arthur's hand and said, I'll give you 2 a minute, and stepped into the hall. A woman who understands when a conversation needs to be private, even if she isn't the one who asked for it. Grace gestured toward the little family lounge around the corner. It had a coffee machine that made everything taste like plastic and 2 chairs with backs too straight to be comfortable. She didn't sit. I didn't either. I don't know what you know, she said. But I know Sebastian has been different for a long time. Distant. Secretive. He keeps jars on a shelf in the garage, dried plants. He says it's for a hobby. He's joined online groups about herbal extraction. She swallowed hard. I didn't think it connected to anything like this. White snakeroot, I said. Have you heard that name? Her eyes showed recognition or fear or both. Yes. I've seen it in his search history. I thought he was just reading, that's all. Detective Richards will want to talk to you if you're willing. She nodded too fast. I already called. I left a message. Good, I said. Relief and grief are cousins. I felt one visiting on behalf of the other. Grace, if you have anything, screenshots, messages, photos of those jars, keep them. Let the detective pull the thread. She looked at me hard enough to really see me. Why would he do this to you? I could have said a dozen things. Money I wouldn't give him. Love I didn't give the way he wanted it. Disappointments that grew into something else. Instead, I told her the truth as I knew it. Because if he can't own the story, he'll burn the page. She flinched like the words were a cold draft. He asked me this morning if I'd heard from you. He said he wanted to know if you liked the bottle. What did you tell him? That you'd given it to my father. We stood there for a few seconds with that sentence between us. The kind of thing that changes shape as you look at it. Thank you, I said, for telling me. I'm sorry, she said. And I knew she meant all of it, not just the part she'd said out loud. We went back to Arthur's room and said nicer things about the weather and football and the kind of soup the cafeteria tries to call chicken noodle. I left when the nurse came to check his monitors, promising to bring magazines and pretending that mattered. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store. I bought 2 new deadbolts and a package of those little stick-on alarms that shriek if a door opens when they're armed. The clerk rang me up and made a joke about winter coming early. I said something about needing to get ahead of it. He bagged the locks like they were groceries and told me to have a good day. We say that to each other. Have a good day, as if the day will actually listen. At home, the thread I'd taped across the door frame was exactly where I'd put it. Untouched. I stepped over it and closed the door behind me with a soft click. I'd thought about calling a locksmith, but putting in the deadbolts myself felt like making my own bed in a strange motel. If I do it, maybe I can lay my head down without all the noise. I installed the first lock on the back door, then the second one on the front, screwing the plates in slowly and firmly, the muscles in my forearms familiar with the angle and the pressure. The little alarms went on the door frames with a sound like peeling off a bandage. I armed them and opened the door to hear the shrill proof that they would work. They did. Good. By the time I finished, the sun had dropped enough to pull long shadows across the floor. I heated a can of soup and ate it standing up, with the bowl cupped in my left hand and the spoon in my right. Old habits. Less to wash that way. The phone buzzed on the hallway table. I didn't jump. I walked to it at the speed of a man going to answer his door. Unknown number again. I let it buzz. It stopped. Seconds later, a text appeared. Sebastian, we need to talk face to face today. A second text followed before I could even think about the first one. Sebastian, don't make this worse than it is. I put the phone down like it might burn me. I wrote the time and the texts exactly as they came in on an index card and added the card to the fireproof box. Then I took Detective Richards's card from my wallet and dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Richards, it's Dalton. He's asking to meet. Do not. He said the 2 words clean as a gate closing. Forward me the texts. I'll log them. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. He left one earlier. I've written it down. Good. Keep doing that. I hesitated. Detective, would you mind coming by and taking a look at my front door? I think someone's used a key that wasn't mine. I can send an officer to photograph and document it. I'll come by myself if I'm free in the next hour. He arrived 40 minutes later with a young uniformed officer named Patel. They photographed the strike plate, the tiny scuff where the key had scraped, and the thread taped low like a trip line. Richards didn't react. He doesn't look like a man who enjoys being right, but he also doesn't waste energy pretending he's surprised when he isn't. Do you have the original set of keys? He asked. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the small tin where we'd kept extras 20 years ago. Inside were 2 brass keys marked front and back in my wife's neat handwriting. A blank key and a key that shouldn't have been there, a copy with no marks, cut a little off-center so it sat awkwardly in the tin. My stomach went cold. This wasn't ours, I said. We never labeled it. We label everything. Richards had Patel bag it. We'll see if we can get prints, he said. No promises. Keys don't hold fingerprints well. Do what you can, I said. I'd like every little thing in this story to stop pretending it's not connected to the rest. When they left, the house felt different. Not safer, not less watched, just witnessed. There's a thing that happens when the official world steps into your private one. The ground tilts, and then it settles at a new angle. I sat at the kitchen table and held my coffee mug with both hands, even though it was empty. The porch swing creaked. No wind I could see. I listened for footsteps that weren't there. I set the phone to Do Not Disturb and put it face down. When I was a boy, I thought being an adult meant no one could tell me what to do. Now it means I've learned who to listen to. Around 9, a car idled outside long enough that I got up and walked to the window. Headlights washed over the porch and then slid on. I stayed by the window until I heard the sound fade away. It might have been nothing, a teenager who was lost, a delivery driver checking an address. It felt like something that wanted to see if I'd flinch. I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the hall light on and my boots by the door. I'm too old for being a hero. I'm not too old to be ready. Just before dawn, the phone buzzed again. Voicemail, no ring. I'd forgotten the Do Not Disturb. I played it with the volume low. Dad, you're making a mess of this, Sebastian's voice said, quieter than before, like he was in a place where he didn't want the walls to hear him. You went to the cops. That's not smart. We could have handled this. You're not thinking straight. He hung up. I wrote it down. We could have handled this. Loaded words. Handled what? At 8 a.m. sharp, Richards called. State lab came back preliminary, he said. Independent confirmation of white snakeroot in your sample. It's enough to officially open a case and request medical records from the hospital for Mr. Reed. We're moving. I let out a breath that had been living in me since Paul said the word snakeroot and hadn't made a plan for exiting. Tell me what you need. Keep doing what you're doing. Document. Do not engage. Lock your doors. I'll be in touch for a formal statement under recording. If your son reaches out, save everything. If he shows up, call 911. I mean that. I know you do, I said. Detective? Yes. Thank you. He didn't say, you're welcome. He said, we'll do our jobs. Which, from a man like him, is the same thing. I showered, shaved, and put on a clean shirt. There's a way a man needs to look when the day is going to require being steady. I made breakfast and ate it at the table like each bite could be a choice I got right. I drove to the hospital with a stack of magazines under my arm, one about home repair, a glossy one with gardens that would never grow in Missouri clay. Arthur was awake enough to pretend to be interested in an article about chainsaw safety. We both knew he was just playing along. The pretense was a kindness. Grace came in halfway through an article about deck maintenance. She had her phone in her hand, and it looked like a person who hadn't slept in a bed, only near one. "Detective Richards called me," she said. "He wants me to bring in Sebastian's old laptop. I still have it from before we got married." "Bring it," I said. "Let the law carry what it's made to carry." She nodded. "Walter, he texted me," she said, her eyes down. "He asked if you were playing hero. He said, if anything happens, it's on you." She lifted her eyes. I forwarded it to Richards. "Good," I said. A heat rose in my chest that wasn't the old kind. It was the kind that knows the difference between a threat and a warning. You don't answer anything he sends. Not one word. Not even to tell him you won't be answering. When I left, the light outside had the weak honesty of midday. I drove home the long way, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to put more road between me and the next thing. The thread at the door was still unbroken. I stepped over it like it was a line I could honor and closed the door behind me. I sat with a pen and a yellow pad and wrote, "What does he want?" in letters big enough to cross the page. Under it, I made 2 columns again. Money and control. Under money I wrote, "Last winter, $20,000, refused." Under control, I wrote, "Bottle placement, missing vial, calls, we need to talk." Control was the heavier side of the scale. Money is a reason. Control is a habit. Habits last longer. At noon, the door alarm chirped its high scream. I was halfway out of my chair and had the phone in my hand before my brain could tell my body it had overreacted. The chirp came again, the cheap little device, proving it could do what I bought it for. I moved to the side of the window out of sight and pulled the curtain back just a finger's width, a delivery truck. The driver had opened the storm door to leave a padded envelope on the mat. He glanced at the alarm, shrugged like a man who had heard 1,000 worse noises, and stepped back. The door eased shut. The alarm went quiet. I let my heart come back to where it belongs and waited. When the truck pulled away, I opened the door. The envelope had no return address. Inside, a single sheet of printer paper. No note, just a photograph printed off a phone, my porch last night, from an angle across the street. The porch swing was still. The light over the door glowed. No person in the frame. The photo had been taken within the last 12 hours. I looked at the street, at the neighbor's hedges, at the spot near the corner where a car could sit with its lights off and see what it wanted. Then I walked the photograph to the fireproof box, added it to the stack, and called Richards. He answered on the first ring. I told him what came, how it came, and what it showed. "Do not throw that away," he said. "I'll send someone." "You're going to get tired of hearing from me," I said. "I'd prefer that to the alternative," he said, and hung up to make it less a conversation and more a task. I stood at the window and watched the street from the side, the way you watch a wild thing you don't want to spook. The porch swing moved once. No wind. Houses are funny that way. What you think is still is always telling you otherwise if you want to see it. By late afternoon, the police had the photograph and my statement about how it arrived. They took the envelope, too. Richards texted. "We're filing preservation requests for camera footage on your block." Practical words, the kind that lays track. Evening came on like a slow closing door. I heated last night's soup and ate it sitting on the back steps, the October air cutting clean in my lungs. The yard darkened, the swing stayed still, and somewhere far off, a dog barked at something only dogs can see. I went inside and turned on the hall light. The phone buzzed one more time. "Sebastian, you think they'll keep you safe from what you started? Call me." I did not. I copied it word for word and slid the paper into the box. The box closed with the soft final sound it always makes. I set it back on the highest shelf the way a man sets a weight where he can't trip over it in the dark. I stood there and listened to the house talk to itself. The settling and sighing of wood. The thin whine of the refrigerator motor. The tick and talk of a clock that has no idea what time means. I thought about the first time Sebastian said, "Dad," in a way that made my heart want to stand up and salute. And the last time he said, "Dad," in a way that made it want to sit down. It was full dark when I finally stretched out on the couch. I put my hand flat on my chest and felt my heart working, slow, steady, professional. A long time ago, a doctor told me I'd know if I was in trouble. Tonight, it felt like the most honest thing I owned. I don't know if sleep came or if the night just decided to have mercy. But when the phone rang at 6:12 a.m., I was ready. I answered on the first ring. "Mr. Dalton," Richard said. "No, hello. State lab confirmed. We're filing for a warrant." I closed my eyes and saw the porch swing, the white thread across the threshold. The photograph of my own house from across the street. I saw a bottle catching the morning light like it was shame in a glass. "Where do you need me?" I asked. "Right where you are," he said. "And whatever happens next, don't open the door unless the person on the other side can prove they're here to help." The line went quiet. The house listened. And I stood in the little country I'd built inside my walls and waited for the day to step over the threshold. They say the knock you don't expect is the one you remember. But this time, I was expecting it. I'd been expecting it since the moment Richards told me the lab had confirmed the poison. Still, when the rap came, sharp and on purpose, my chest tightened. Not from fear, from knowing the line we'd been walking in the dark was about to be painted in bright, official ink. That sound meant the warrant had teeth now. And the day wasn't going to wait for me to feel ready. It was just after 8 a.m. The light outside had that thin gold that barely touches the ground before it slips away. I opened the door to find Richard standing with two uniforms, Patel from before and another officer I didn't know, young enough that his belt still looked too big for him. They were dressed for work that wasn't going to stay on paper. "Morning, Mr. Dalton," Richard said, holding up a folded document in a clear plastic sleeve. "Judge signed off at 7:43. We have authority to search your son's residence and seize any items relevant to the case." He didn't have to say it. This was the step where everything could turn. "Do you need me there?" I asked. "No," he said. "And that's not a request. It's an instruction. We don't want you in his line of sight today. We'll handle the search. If we find what we think we'll find, we'll proceed accordingly." Proceed accordingly is cop language for, your life might not look the same by dinner. Patel glanced past me toward the interior hallway. "Any changes overnight?" The thread's still there. "No alarms triggered." Richards gave a short nod. "Good. Keep them armed. I'll have one of our techs install a proper camera system before the week's out." They left in a convoy, a black sedan, a marked cruiser rolling down the street like a line of punctuation, headed for an unfinished sentence. I stood in the doorway until they turned the corner. Then I closed the door and looked at the thread at the bottom of the frame, still perfectly still, as if daring someone to disturb it. The hours after they left were the kind that stretch. I tried reading. The words sat on the page like strangers at a bus stop. I made coffee. I didn't drink. Around 11, I took a slow drive toward the edge of town, stopping at the little Veterans Memorial Park, where the benches face a fountain that hasn't run since last summer. The sound of traffic from Main Street was faint enough here to let the air settle. I'd been here once with Sebastian when he was 10. We'd brought bread for the ducks. He'd asked me what all the names on the plaques were for. I told him they were for men and women who'd done their jobs to the end. He asked if that meant they'd finished the mission. I said yes. He didn't ask me what the mission was. Sometimes I think that's the part one should have explained. By 1 p.m., I was back home sitting at the kitchen table with the phone face up. I wasn't expecting him to call me. Sebastian's not the call when you're cornered type. He's the type to show up unannounced, to force the conversation on his terms. That's what had Richards worried. At 1:17, the phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from Grace. Grace, they're here. There. I'm in the bedroom with the door shut. I can hear them going through the garage. Me? Stay inside. Don't interfere. You're safe with them there. No reply came back. I pictured her sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, listening to boots on concrete and the sound of cardboard boxes being moved. I knew that sound. It's the sound of someone looking for the truth without caring if they wake the house. At 2:04, Richards called. We found it. I let the words land. Found what? 3 mason jars labeled with masking tape, WSR, rootstock, and tincture. 2 of them contain dried plant material consistent with white snakeroot. The third contains liquid. We'll send it to the lab for confirmation. We also found handwritten notes on preparation methods, dosage estimates, and... He paused. And an envelope addressed to you, unsealed. Inside, a short letter. Your name at the top, the words, "You'll understand why when it's over," at the bottom. Nothing in between but a drawing of a tree with its roots circled. The kitchen felt colder. He left me a message in case the bottle worked. That's what it looks like, Richard said, his voice even. We'll log it, bag it, and photograph everything. Grace is cooperating fully. She's given us consent to search their shared digital devices. Do you have him in custody? Not yet. He wasn't home when we arrived. We're putting out a locate. I gripped the phone tighter. Detective, if he comes here, call 911 immediately. I've already flagged your address for priority response. Don't engage him. The line went quiet for a beat. Then he said, We're moving from suspicion to evidence, Mr. Dalton. That changes the game. I understand. I hung up and went to the fireproof box. I added a card. 2:04 p.m. Richards called, found jars, notes, letter. I read the other cards in the stack one by one, like flipping through a manual for a machine you can't take apart. Each entry was its own piece of proof that the last month hadn't been a fever dream. Around 3:30, I called Betty to update her. Arthur was asleep. She listened without interrupting, the way she had when I'd called from the emergency room years ago after my heart attack. Walter, she said when I finished. This is going to end in one of 2 ways. He'll be arrested or he'll run. He won't run far, I said. No, but far enough to make you wonder. At 4:12, the door alarm shrieked. I was in the hallway in 3 steps, phone in hand. The front door was shut, the thread across the frame unbroken. The sound had come from the back. I moved slowly, not because I was scared, but because you don't rush when you need to see everything. Through the kitchen window, I saw the screen door swing once, twice, then stop. No one in sight. I stepped closer and spotted a folded sheet of paper wedged between the handle and the frame. I opened the door, disarmed the alarm, and pulled the paper free. One sentence in thick black marker: stop letting them in or I will. No signature, no envelope, just those words. I took a photograph, slipped the paper into a plastic sleeve, and called Richards. He said an officer would be by within 15 minutes. Patel arrived in 10, photographed the note in my hand, the spot on the door, the hinges, and the yard beyond. You see anyone? I asked. No movement on the street, he said. Could have been dropped and run. He left with the note, promising to log it immediately. That evening, I didn't bother with the couch. I set a chair in the corner of the living room where I could see both the front and back doors. The house smelled faintly of metal from the new locks. I kept the lights on, not because I wanted to see out, but because I wanted anyone outside to see me. At 9:45, my phone lit up. Unknown number. I let it ring to voicemail. A minute later, I played it. Dad, it's me. They're making a mistake. Those things they found, they're not what they think. You know me better than that. A pause. Call me, please. The voice was calm, measured, almost gentle, the kind of tone you'd use to sell someone something they didn't want to buy. I didn't call back. I wrote it down word for word. Morning brought a sharp frost. The grass was white at the tips, and the air tasted like coins. Richards texted at 8:12. We have him. Brought in without incident. We'll update. I stared at the words until they stopped being shapes and started being facts. I drove to the station just before noon. The waiting area was small, with 2 plastic chairs against one wall and a vending machine humming in the corner. Richards came out to meet me. He's not talking, he said. Asked for a lawyer right away. That's fine. We've got enough to hold him. His wife provided substantial digital evidence. Emails referencing route prep and perfect timing. Search history for toxicity levels in adults over 60. What happens now? We'll present charges to the prosecutor. Attempted murder. Possession of a controlled toxic substance. Tampering with evidence. It'll move fast. I nodded. My hands stayed in my pocket so they wouldn't do anything they shouldn't. Richard studied me for a moment. You holding up? I'm standing, I said. That's enough. When I left the station, the sky had gone that dull pewter color that makes you think snow's coming, even if the forecast swears otherwise. I drove without a destination, passing the old mill, the shuttered hardware store, the diner that still smelled like grease from 20 years ago. I ended up at the hospital. Arthur was awake, watching a game show on mute. Betty sat beside him, knitting something green. They got him, I said quietly. Arthur nodded once. Good. Betty's needles kept moving. What now? Now, I said. We wait for the rest to do its work. That night, I sat on the back steps with a mug of tea, steam rising into the cold. The yard was quiet, except for the occasional crack of a branch in the wind. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then stopped. I thought about the note on the door, the jars in the garage, the letter with the tree roots, and I thought about the boy with the bread at the memorial fountain, asking if the names meant they'd finished the mission. Maybe this was my mission, not to finish it, but to make sure it didn't finish me. When I went inside, I checked the thread on the door, still there, still telling the truth. Poison is an ugly word. It doesn't just sit in your mouth. It changes the way you breathe. Richards didn't say it right away. He let Paul explain first, maybe because he knew hearing it from a friend would land softer than hearing it from a detective. But there's no soft way to hear that something meant to kill you was already inside a man you respect, and that you'd been the one to hand it to him. It started 2 mornings after Arthur's first collapse. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal I didn't plan on eating when the phone rang. Paul's voice was low, controlled. Walter, you sitting down? I eased into the chair by the table, my eyes on the clock. I'm down. Talk to me. I ran the tests twice. Thought the first might have been contaminated, but it wasn't. There's white snakeroot extract in that whiskey. Enough to send someone with heart issues straight to the ICU. You said Arthur's got a pacemaker, right? Yeah, I said. My mouth was dry. And I've got my bum ticker, you know that. That's why I'm calling you before I call Richards. This isn't accidental, Walter. The levels are too precise. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing. I let that sit. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a warning. Go ahead and call him. He needs to know now. I'll send him the report. Keep your phone close. The moment I hung up, I looked at the fireproof box in the corner of the living room. I'd been keeping the little things, dates, copies of texts, photos of the box, and now the plastic vial with the whiskey sample. I took out a fresh card. Paul confirmed poison. 8:43 a.m. Call to Richards pending. I wrote it slowly, each word a nail. By the time I put the pen down, the phone was ringing again. Richards, Mr. Dalton, he said. I just got off with Paul. I'm on my way to your place now. We're going to need the original bottle, any packaging, and your statement. You comfortable with me taking it into evidence? I don't want it in my house another minute, I said. He arrived in under 15 minutes, alone this time. He wore plain clothes, a dark jacket and jeans, but the badge was still on his belt. Where is it? He asked, not even sitting down. I pointed to the cabinet where I'd kept it since the day it arrived. He put on gloves, lifted the bottle with both hands like it was an unexploded shell. You haven't opened it? No. Didn't even crack the seal. Figured I'd give it to Arthur and let him decide. Richards inspected the label, the wax top, and the engraved serial number. These limited editions are often tracked through distributors. If Sebastian bought it himself, we might be able to follow the paper trail. If he had someone else get it. He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. That someone's as guilty as he is, I finished. We sat at the table while I went over everything, Sebastian's gift, the handwriting, and my decision to pass it to Arthur. I told him about the last words Sebastian had said to me before the silence. One day, you'll regret siding with him over me. Richards wrote it down verbatim. That's important. Shows motive, resentment. Motive's not new, I said. The method is. Later that afternoon, I went to see Arthur. He was sitting up, pale but alert, the TV on low. Betty was by his side, knitting something dark blue. They found something in the whiskey, I told him quietly. Arthur's brows pulled together like a bad storage. Like poison, I said. White snakeroot. Paul tested it twice. Betty's hands froze mid-stitch. Walter, I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know. Arthur shook his head. Don't blame yourself. You didn't pour it in there. No, I said, but I put it in your hands. Driving home that evening, the weight in my chest wasn't just from my heart condition. It was knowing that every mile I drove was a mile closer to whatever came next. Sebastian had crossed a line you don't uncross, not just with me, but with his own wife's father. At a red light, I caught myself gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I thought about the day he was born, the first time he'd wrapped his tiny hand around my finger, and I thought about the hand that had written those cold words on the package. The next day, Paul called again. Walter, he said. I dug a little deeper. White snakeroot isn't exactly common in bulk. There are agricultural controls. Someone had to grow it or get it from a controlled source. So, not just some wild plant he picked off the side of the road. Nope. And the way it was processed, extracted, reduced, blended into the whiskey. It's careful work, like someone was testing how much they could use without changing the taste. That detail chilled me more than anything. Testing meant practice, and practice meant intent. Richards came by in the evening with an update. We've got probable cause to get a search warrant for Sebastian's property, garage, shed, and any storage units. The judge will need the lab confirmation from our team, but Paul's report gets us most of the way. Do it fast, I said. He's not the type to wait around if he smells trouble. Richards studied me. Mr. Dalton, when this moves forward, it's going to get ugly. Are you ready for that? I thought about Arthur's pale face, the monitors beeping beside his bed. Ugly's already here. That night, the house felt too quiet. I double-checked the locks, the thread I'd strung low across the inside of the front door frame, and the motion sensor light in the back. A habit from my service days, always know if someone's been where they shouldn't. I sat at the kitchen table with the fireproof box open, reading through my cards like chapters. Each one was its piece of the story. I wondered what the last card would say. Just after midnight, a noise woke me, a soft clink, like glass on wood. I got up, moved to the living room. Through the front door's frosted pane, I saw a shadow moving away down the steps. By the time I opened the door, the street was empty. At my feet was a small square box wrapped in brown paper. No ribbon this time. No note. I didn't touch it. Called Richards instead. He told me to step away, wait for an officer. When Patel arrived, he crouched to inspect it, then whistled low. "Feels like another bottle," he said. "Another whiskey." He nodded. Could be. Could be something else. They took it without opening it in front of me. The next day, Richards confirmed it wasn't whiskey, just an empty decanter. But inside, where liquid should have been, was a folded piece of paper with 2 words, "Next time." That was the moment the case stopped being about evidence alone. It was about time. How much of it did we have before he tried again? The morning after, Richards called early. "Judge signed the warrant. We're serving it tomorrow morning. I want you to stay put. Keep your head down." "Not my first rodeo," I said. "Maybe not, but it might be your last if you're not careful." That day dragged like a bad leg. I kept myself busy, fixing a loose hinge on the back gate, tightening the screws on the porch rail. Busy work just to keep from staring at the road, waiting for a truck I recognized. Around 5, Betty called. "Arthur's coming home tomorrow. Doctor says he's stable." That bit of good news didn't lighten me much. If anything, it made me more aware of what we'd almost lost. By nightfall, I'd set out a fresh card for the box, warrant signed. Search tomorrow. I sat in the chair by the front window, watching the last of the light drain from the street. The lamppost flickered on. Somewhere a dog barked twice and fell silent. I thought about the word Paul had used, precise, about how someone can use precision for building or breaking, and how my son had chosen the latter. I didn't sleep much. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow seemed closer. When the first light came, I poured coffee. I didn't drink. I sat at the table and waited for the phone to ring. It rang at 7:43. "Richards, we're rolling." And with that, part 5 ended not with an answer, but with the sharp intake of breath before one. They say you can't prepare yourself to see your child in handcuffs. I wasn't seeing it yet, but I knew it was coming. What you can prepare for is the silence. The moment when the truth starts climbing out of the dark corners, and you realize it's not going back in. At 7:43 a.m., Richards had said, "We're rolling." By 8:15, I was sitting 2 blocks from Sebastian's house, watching from behind the cracked windshield of my old Ford as the police cars pulled up in front of his driveway. I hadn't told Richards I'd be there. He'd have told me to stay home. But there's a difference between being warned and being scared off. This was my fight, too, even if I wasn't holding the warrant. Sebastian's place sat on a corner lot, the kind of suburban box with vinyl siding and a lawn too perfect to be natural. I watched as 2 officers approached the door, Richards right behind them. One knocked, a long pause. Then the door opened, and there he was, my son, wearing a faded St. Louis Cardinals t-shirt and a face I barely recognized. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the stiff way he crossed his arms, the half-step back when Richards held up the paper. The officers entered, and Sebastian followed, his jaw tight. I stayed in the truck, engine off, hands on the wheel. The minutes stretched. I imagined the sound of drawers opening, boxes sliding across shelves, the rustle of paper. I'd been in enough searches during my service years to know the rhythm. Quick sweep, then slow sift. My phone buzzed. A text from Richards, found something. Will update. That something came into view 20 minutes later when an officer carried a plastic evidence bag to the patrol car. Even from where I sat, I could see the label. Same brand, same cereal style as the whiskey Sebastian had sent me. Only this one was half empty. I didn't move. Didn't breathe, almost, because finding that bottle wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the end. At 9:05, Richard stepped outside, scanned the street, and spotted my truck. He walked over, leaned down to the open window. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Too late for that." "What did you find?" "A couple more bottles from the same batch. One open, one sealed. We'll get them tested, but there's residue in the open one, white powder. Faint, same as what Paul found." I swallowed hard. "That's enough. It's enough to push this forward." "But Walter," he hesitated. "We also found a notebook, handwritten, coded in parts. Paul might be able to help us with it, but from what I skimmed, it reads like dosage notes, trials." The word trials landed heavily. So Arthur wasn't the first? Richards didn't answer. He didn't have to. I sat back, my eyes on the house. Inside somewhere was the boy I'd taught to ride a bike. The teenager I'd driven to his first job. The young man I'd stood beside when he married Grace. And now there was a man who kept dosage notes. A man who could have been the reason Arthur nearly died. Richards's radio crackled. He straightened. "They're bringing him out. You sure you want to see this?" "I've already seen enough," I said. But I didn't drive away. The front door opened. Sebastian stepped out, flanked by 2 officers. His wrists were cuffed in front of him, his chin high, eyes cold. He scanned the street until they landed on me. Our eyes locked. No words, no nod. Just that stare, the kind you give someone you once knew but no longer claim. They put him in the back of the cruiser. I stayed put until the car pulled away, the reflection of the morning sun catching on the glass. Richards came back over. "He's going downtown. We'll book him, start the interview. He'll probably lawyer up." "I know," I said. "What about the notebook?" "I'll get it copied before it goes into full evidence. If you're up for it, you can look, see if any of the dates match something you remember." That afternoon at the station, Richards laid the notebook on the table between us. The handwriting was Sebastian's, unmistakable loops on the G, the way he pressed hard enough to dent the page. Some entries were dated with numbers beside them. Others were symbols, a triangle, an asterisk. Paul joined us via speakerphone, his voice crackling through the line. "That triangle, that's shorthand for half dose in some veterinary circles, and the asterisk usually means, observe for delayed effect." I flipped to a page dated 6 months ago. Next to the date was a single word, test. Then a triangle, then RC. My stomach turned. RC. Arthur Reed. Richards wrote it down. So, he's been thinking about this for months. 2 pages later, I saw another set of initials. WD, my own. Next to it, no triangle, no half dose, just a solid number bigger than the rest. Paul's voice was quiet. "That's a lethal dose, Walter." For a moment, the room tilted. I steadied myself with a hand on the table. So, Arthur wasn't the only target. "No," Richard said. "You were the other." I drove home in silence. The notebook's images burned into my mind. Every meal, every drink I'd had in the last year replayed in my head, looking for moments he could have acted. I thought of that whiskey bottle sitting in my cabinet for days before I gave it to Arthur. I thought about what would have happened if I'd decided to drink just one glass for old time's sake. By evening, the local news had it. Local man arrested in alleged poisoning attempt. They didn't use Sebastian's name yet, but the description was enough for anyone who knew us to fill in the blanks. Betty called. The neighbors are talking. Arthur's furious, says if Sebastian shows his face at the house again, he'll. She trailed off. You okay? Not really, but I'm not dead. That's something. That night, I opened the fireproof box again, added a new card, WD initials in notebook, lethal dose, slid it in next to the others. The box was getting full. I sat on the porch, the air heavy with summer heat, thinking about the difference between justice and closure. Justice can come in a courtroom. Closure? That's trickier. 2 days later, Richards called early. Walter, his lawyers angling for a deal. Claims Sebastian didn't know the whiskey was tainted, that he bought it from a friend and didn't check it. But with the notebook, that's a hard sell. What happens if he pleads out? Lighter sentence. Maybe no trial, but it's still prison time. Question is, do you want to see him in court? I looked out at the street, the same one Sebastian had learned to ride his bike on, and thought about the weight of my answer. They say every man has a line he won't cross. I used to think mine was family. No matter what Sebastian did, I told myself I'd never push him so far he couldn't find his way back. But that was before the whiskey, before Arthur in a hospital bed, before I found my initials in that notebook next to a number that meant you don't wake up. Now the line felt like a chalk mark in the rain, fading fast. The morning after Richards called, I didn't get out of bed right away. The ceiling fan ticked slowly overhead, and my mind kept circling the same thought. If I say yes to a trial, I'll be the man who put his son in prison for a long, long time. If I say no, I'll be the man who let him walk after trying to kill me. Either way, there's no going back. By 9 a.m., I was at the station. Richards was in the interview room, leaning over a stack of papers. Across from him sat Sebastian's lawyer, a wiry man with silver hair and an expression like he'd already won. Sebastian wasn't there. They'd kept him in holding. Richards waved me in. Walter, this is Mr. Galt. Galt stood, shook my hand, his grip dry and calculated. Mr. Dalton, I appreciate you coming in. I think we can resolve this in a way that spares everyone the unpleasantness of a trial. I sat. You mean in a way that spares Sebastian? His smile didn't flinch. He's prepared to admit to mishandling the bottle, carelessness, not malice. In exchange, reduced charges, no attempted murder. He'd serve some time, but not much. And the notebook? I asked. An exercise in paranoia, Galt said smoothly. Our position is that it's fiction, scribbles, nothing more. I looked at Richards. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tightened. I leaned back. Do you know what it's like to read your initials next to a lethal dose, Mr. Galt? To see that written by the kid you taught to fish, the one you drove across the state so he could try out for his first baseball team? For the first time, Galt's gaze dropped. We're talking about avoiding a public spectacle, Mr. Dalton. I let the silence stretch. The ticking wall clock felt louder. Finally, I said, I'll think about it. And I walked out. In the hallway, Richards caught up. You don't have to decide today. But Walter, if you go for trial, we've got enough to make it stick. The DA is ready to file the full charges. What would you do? I asked. Richard sighed. I don't have skin in your game. But if it were me, I'd make sure the next person he hands a drink to doesn't end up in the ground. That night, my phone rang. It was Arthur Reed. His voice was still weak but steady. Walter, I heard about the deal they're offering him. Word travels fast. You can't take it. Arthur, no. Listen to me. If you do, he'll think he can come back from anything. Next time, it won't be whiskey. It'll be something no one catches in time. Maybe it'll be you. Maybe it'll be someone else he's decided doesn't deserve to be here. I closed my eyes. The truth in his voice was like gravel, rough, but solid. The next morning, I drove to Paul's place. Names from the text. Frank Dalton. Gary. Ethan Dalton. Reyes. Caldwell, Mr. Robert Carson. Linda. Names replaced. Frank Dalton, Walter Dalton. Gary Paul. Ethan Dalton, Sebastian Dalton. Reyes Richards. Caldwell Galt. Robert Carson, Arthur Reed. Linda Betty. Updated text with new names. He was in his workshop tinkering with a busted outboard motor. Walter, he said. You look like a man deciding whether to pull a trigger. Something like that. We sat on overturned buckets, the smell of oil thick in the air. I told him about the plea deal. He wiped his hands on a rag. You already know what you're going to do. You just want me to make you feel better about it. Maybe. Paul tossed the rag onto the workbench. Walter, a man who keeps dosage notes isn't careless. He's committed. You go easy now, you might as well hand him the pen and paper for his next list. That afternoon, I drove past Sebastian's house. The blinds were shut, the driveway empty. I thought about the garage, the one where he'd fixed up an old Ford when he was 16. Grease on his hands. A grin on his face when the engine finally turned over. Back then, I thought it meant he could build something lasting. Now I wondered if it was just the first sign he could take things apart. At home, I opened the fireproof box again. The cards were all there, Arthur's name, the lab results, the notebook page with WD. I laid them out like a hand of bad poker. Then I imagined shoving them back in and locking the box away, pretending they didn't matter. But the truth was, they mattered more than anything. The decision came like a door clicking shut. I called Richards. Tell the DA I'll testify. Full charges. He didn't say, good man, or you're doing the right thing. He just said, understood. And that was enough. 3 days later, the hearing was set. Pre-trial motions, evidence lists, witness prep. Galt filed objections to half of it, but the judge overruled most. When they brought Sebastian into the courtroom for the first time, he scanned the room and found me. His eyes didn't soften. If anything, they sharpened, like I just made his list again. I held his gaze, because maybe I had. They call it a courtroom, but to me it felt like a minefield. Every word, every glance could blow up in your face. I'd walked in thinking the truth would stand on its own. Then I saw the way Sebastian's lawyer was smiling at me, like he already knew where I was going to step and how hard I was going to fall. The day of the evidentiary hearing, the benches were half full, but the air felt heavier than a packed church in August. I sat behind Richards and the DA, my hands folded in my lap, pretending they weren't sweating. Sebastian came in wearing county orange, wrists cuffed. He didn't look at me at first. Then he did, just long enough to let the corners of his mouth twitch, not into a smile, but into something colder. I reminded myself why I was here, Arthur's hospital bed, the lab report, that damn notebook. The judge called us to order. Richards took the stand first, crisp and professional, walking the court through how the bottle had been received, tested, and confirmed as poisoned. Galt objected twice, claiming lack of chain of custody, but the judge overruled both. Then came my turn. The bailiff swore me in. I sat down, the microphone close enough that I could hear my breathing. The DA started with soft pitches, my name, my age, where I lived, and my relation to the defendant. Yes, Sebastian is my son, I said, and it sounded strange in the open air, like it belonged to someone else's life. The DA guided me to the day of the gift. I told it straight, the package, the handwriting, the decision to give it to Arthur. How Arthur ended up in the hospital. How Paul tested the bottle. I kept my tone even, like Richards told me. Stick to the facts. Let the evidence do the work. Then Galt stood. Mr. Dalton, he began, his voice smooth as polished wood. You claim you recognize my client's handwriting on the note? I don't claim. I know. But you haven't seen that handwriting in over 3 years. Correct? That's correct. Is it possible, then, that you're mistaken? No. He leaned in, one hand on the rail. You're telling this court you're certain beyond any doubt that a man's life should be ruined because you think a note looks like your son's handwriting? I felt the first flare of heat in my chest. I don't think. I know. Galt stepped back almost casually. Interesting. Because we have here, he held up a paper, a handwriting analysis from a certified examiner who says the note could not have been written by Sebastian Dalton. Murmurs rippled through the room. The judge banged her gavel. The DA objected, questioning the report's validity. The judge allowed it for the record, but my stomach dropped. Galt smiled faintly. And tell me, Mr. Dalton, isn't it true that you and my client have had a strained relationship for years? That you sold his mother's farm without consulting him? The DA objected again, irrelevant and inflammatory. Sustained, the judge said, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it. When it was over, I stepped down, my legs heavier than they'd been in years. Richards met me at the table. They're trying to paint you as bitter, resentful, he said quietly. It's all they've got. Don't let it stick. But I could feel it sticking already. Outside on the courthouse steps, Arthur was waiting, leaning on his cane. They're throwing dirt, he said. Doesn't matter if it's true. They just need enough to cloud the water. I nodded. They've got a handwriting report now. Arthur's mouth twisted. Paid for, most likely. I've seen those in business disputes. You can buy an opinion the way you buy a tie. That night, I sat on the porch, the crickets loud, the air smelling faintly of rain. I kept replaying Galt's questions. Each one had been aimed at making me look like a bitter old man with a grudge, not a father trying to survive his own son's betrayal. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at it for a long time, 3 years without whiskey. And yet here I was, feeling like I'd swallowed something that burned just as bad. The next morning, Richards called. Walter, I've got something, he said. We pulled text records from Sebastian's phone. There's a string of messages to a contact saved as AR, the night before Arthur got sick. Arthur Reed. Not exactly. We traced the number. It's a burner phone bought 2 towns over. But the texts, Walter, they read like instructions. Dosage, timing. And here's the kicker, they matched the compound Paul found in the whiskey. I felt the knot in my chest loosen just slightly. Does the DA have it? They will by noon. This changes the game. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Galt. Mr. Dalton, he said smoothly. You should know your testimony today. It only made me more certain you're letting old wounds cloud your judgment. If you push this to trial, everything about your past with Sebastian comes out. Everything. You ready for that? It wasn't a threat in tone, but in content. It was sharp as a knife. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence stretch until he finally hung up. That evening, I drove out to the lake. The water was still, reflecting the low orange sun. I thought about the farm, about Betty's laughter on summer nights, about the boy Sebastian used to be. And I thought about Arthur, pale in that hospital bed, tubes in his arm. When I left the lake, I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't stepping back. The truth wasn't just on trial. It was mine to carry, all the way to the verdict. The morning of the trial, I didn't shave. Not out of defiance, but because I wanted the jury to see the truth on my face. Every line carved by years of work, loss, and the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. I wasn't here to look polished. I was here to end something. And if that meant watching my son in shackles, so be it. The courtroom was already humming when I walked in. The DA sat at our table, shuffling papers. Richards gave me a nod from the back row, the kind that says, "We've got this, but it's going to hurt." Sebastian was brought in, still in that same muted orange jumpsuit. His eyes swept the room, stopping briefly on me. This time there was no smirk, just something unreadable, like he was trying to decide whether I was even worth the effort of hating. The judge entered, the bailiff called for order, and suddenly the trial was underway. The DA's opening statement was clean, sharp, and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about trust. Trust given and trust betrayed in a way most of us can hardly imagine. You will hear how the defendant, Sebastian Dalton, knowingly sent a gift laced with a deadly toxin to his father." I watched the jurors' eyes as the DA spoke. A few darted toward Sebastian. Others kept their gaze locked on the DA. Nobody looked bored. Galt's opening was smooth as oil. He painted me as estranged, resentful, unwilling to reconcile, and hinted at family disputes over property as a motive for me to fabricate the entire thing. I kept my jaw still, but inside I could feel the old anger rise. The first witness was Arthur Reed. He walked slowly to the stand, leaning hard on his cane, but his voice was steady. "I remember the taste, bitter, not like any whiskey I'd had before," he told the jury. "Within an hour, I couldn't stand without help. I thought it was my heart giving out. Turns out it was someone else's idea entirely." When Galt cross-examined him, he tried to suggest Arthur had mixed medications with alcohol and caused his own condition. Arthur's answer was, "Quiet, son. I've been on these meds for 10 years. Never ended up in the hospital until that night." The jury liked that answer. I could see it. Then Richards took the stand with the phone records, the texts to the burner phone, the timestamps, the chemical dosage instructions, all laid out. Galt objected to their admissibility, citing privacy violations, but the judge overruled him. When the DA asked Richards to read one of the messages aloud, the room went silent. "Make sure he gets it all in the first pour. Won't take much with his heart." Some jurors looked shocked. One woman in the front row pressed her lips together like she was holding back words. I felt my breath catch. Seeing the evidence in black and white was one thing. Hearing it out loud in that sterile courtroom was another. The DA called me next. I told the story again, birthdays, the bottle, giving it to Arthur in the hospital. I tried not to linger on the personal, but it's hard to talk about your son trying to kill you without the edges showing. Galt's cross-examination was harsher this time. "Mr. Dalton, are you aware that my client claims this was a gift purchased by his wife without his knowledge?" I shook my head. "No. And I don't believe it." "You don't believe it because you don't want to believe it. You've built this entire case on assumptions." "No," I cut in. "On evidence. The kind your client left all over that bottle." The judge told me to answer only when asked, but I'd already seen Galt's jaw tighten. By the afternoon, both sides had rested their cases for the day. Tomorrow would be the closing arguments. I stepped outside into the cool air, but before I could take 2 breaths, I heard my name. "Dad." I turned. Sebastian stood just beyond the security checkpoint, a deputy at his elbow. His voice was low. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No, it makes me a man who's still alive." His lip curled. "This isn't over." The deputy pulled him away before I could answer. That night, Richards called. "You should know," he said. Galt filed a motion for a mistrial. Claims new evidence wasn't disclosed in time. Will it stick? Not with this judge. But it's a scare tactic. They're trying to rattle you before tomorrow. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew they weren't just trying to rattle me. They were trying to see if I'd flinch. The next morning, I put on the same jacket I'd worn to Betty's funeral. Not out of sentiment, but because it reminded me what real loss feels like. Whatever happened in that courtroom today, I'd already survived worse. When the judge called for closing arguments, the DA's voice was like steel wrapped in velvet. You have heard the testimony. You have seen the evidence. And you have read the words the defendant sent to his accomplice. This was no accident. It was a deliberate act against his father and his father's friend. We ask you to return the only verdict that reflects the truth, guilty. Galt's closing was colder, almost clinical. He spoke of reasonable doubt, of family rifts, of the dangers of assuming intent. But when the jury left to deliberate, I saw something in their faces, fatigue, maybe, but also certainty. The wait felt longer than the trial itself. Richard sat with me in the hallway, saying little. Arthur dozed in a chair, his cane across his lap. Then the bailiff called us back in. The jury was ready. I watched their foreman stand. He didn't look at Sebastian. He looked at the judge. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant. And in that half-second before he finished, I realized I'd been holding my breath since the day that bottle showed up on my porch. Guilty. That one word landed like the first drop of rain on a roof after months of drought. It didn't thunder. It didn't roar. It just sank in, quiet but undeniable. And I knew there was no going back. Not for Sebastian. Not for me. The courtroom didn't explode in gasps like you see on TV. It just breathed differently, and for the first time in 3 years, I did too. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, and began reading the sentence. 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15. His voice was steady, measured, but I could feel the weight of every syllable pressing down. Sebastian didn't flinch. He just sat there, hands cuffed in front of him, eyes fixed on some spot above the judge's head. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought he was bored. The bailiff moved to escort him out, but Sebastian turned his head at the last moment. Our eyes met, and in that instant, there was no courtroom, no jury, no uniformed officers, just the boy I'd once taught to throw a baseball, staring back at the man he tried to kill. His lips barely moved. This isn't the last chapter. Then he was gone. I thought relief would flood in, but it didn't. What came instead was a hollow ache. Justice had been served on paper, but nothing on paper could glue back the pieces of what had shattered between us. Arthur Reed put a hand on my shoulder as we walked out. You did what you had to do, Walter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I nodded, but I didn't answer, because there was a part of me that still wondered if I'd lost more than I'd won. Outside, the air was sharper than it had been that morning. The sky had that late autumn brightness where the sun feels close, but the wind cuts right through you. Arthur's daughter pulled up in a blue pickup, helped him into the passenger seat, and gave me a small wave. I walked the 2 blocks to my truck alone. No reporters followed me. This wasn't the kind of case that made headlines outside our county, but in our small circle, it would echo for a long time. When I slid behind the wheel, I caught sight of something in the passenger seat, the envelope the court clerk had handed me before we left. Inside was Sebastian's property inventory, watch, belt, wallet, and a folded note. The handwriting was his. You always said we were more alike than I wanted to admit. Maybe now you'll see that's not a compliment. No signature, just that. I didn't crumple it. I folded it back up, slid it into the glove box, and started the engine. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No cryptic messages, no unexpected knocks at the door. Arthur recovered faster than the doctors expected, though his appetite for whiskey had evaporated entirely. Paul came by one afternoon with a paper bag. Inside was the small vial of whiskey he'd tested for me. "Thought you might want to keep it," he said, "not as a trophy, as a reminder." I put it next to the glass I'd saved, the one Arthur had drunk from that night. Together, they looked almost innocent, like props in a still life painting. But I knew better. 2 months after the verdict, Detective Richard stopped by on his way home from a fishing trip. He leaned against my porch rail, the late sun catching in his sunglasses. "They found out where the poison came from," he said. "Wasn't Sebastian's idea, at least not originally." My jaw tightened. Grace's cousin works in landscaping, knows how to extract white snakeroot. He thought he was doing Sebastian a favor, but Sebastian's the one who decided to send it to you. It didn't change the facts. It didn't undo anything. But it did confirm what I'd felt in my bones: Sebastian hadn't acted in a vacuum. Betrayal has roots, and sometimes they run deeper than blood. That winter, I finally fixed the porch swing. The same swing I'd sat on the morning that the package arrived. The chains didn't creak anymore. The boards didn't splinter. One cold afternoon, I sat there with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun drop behind the bare trees. On the small table beside me was the glass, the vial, and a single manila envelope labeled "Do Not Open," in my handwriting. Inside was everything: photos of Sebastian as a boy, the court documents, and the note he'd left me. One day, maybe I'd decide whether to keep it or burn it. For now, it stayed sealed. People think revenge ends when the gavel falls, when the guilty are led away. But the truth is, revenge is just the surface. Beneath it are the years you can't get back, the conversations you'll never have, the family dinners that will stay empty chairs and cold plates. Justice gave me safety. It didn't give me peace. But as the wind shifted and carried the smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the road, I realized something: peace isn't given. It's built. One quiet afternoon at a time, one decision not to look back at a locked door. I raised my coffee cup to the empty yard. To endings, I said aloud, and whatever comes after. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on your screen.